You haven't seen these amazing historical photos yet? Write your opinion in the comments. I will be glad to read it. Nadia Jeriagic on the left used a Dragunov rifle from a 20th floor apartment during the siege of Sarajevo. The most unsettling detail is the couch. Between 1992 and 1995, a normal living room became a high city position above the streets. The Iroquois Theater burned in Chicago on December 30th, 1903, just 37 days after opening. Locked doors and hidden exits trapped the holiday crowd, making it the deadliest theater disaster in United States history. These women were photographed at a 1916 convention of formerly enslaved people more than 50 years after the Civil War ended. Their faces make the image powerful because they were not reading history. They had lived through the system that textbooks later tried to explain. Eva Justin, from Germany's Racial Hygiene Research Unit, recorded details from a Romani family in 1938. The quiet courtyard looks ordinary, but her paperwork helped turn real families into state files before wartime policies closed around Roma communities. In the woods of Cayette in 1916, a French soldier wore a captured German gas mask while moving through a stripped and broken battlefield. The dead trees show how quickly modern war turned a forest near Verdun into a bare landscape of mud, trenches, and survival gear. Ossip Bernstein reportedly escaped a life-or-death order in Odessa in 1918 after a Bolshevik officer recognized his name from chess tournaments. The officer tested him with one game, Bernstein won, and he later reached Paris with one of the strangest survival stories in chess history. Harold Whittles was photographed in 1974 at the moment he first heard sound through a hearing aid. His wide eyes made the photo famous because it captured a child discovering a sense most people never think about. Galina Brezhneva, daughter of Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, was photographed dancing on a table near Moscow in 1992. The image is striking because the old Soviet portrait still hangs on the wall while Brezhnev's own daughter celebrates in a very different Russia. On June 25, 1944, a German coastal artillery round landed between USS Texas and USS Arkansas off Cherbourg, France. Both battleships kept firing at Battery Hamburg, and this photo shows how close one shot came to changing the entire battle. In Bosnia, in 1997, the King's Royal Hussars used horses beside Challenger 1 armored vehicles near Mirakonjic Grad. The photo looks centuries out of place because pack horses could move through terrain where modern machines still needed the narrow road. This old postcard shows an unidentified man dressed like a monk with horn-like growths near the side of his head. The strangest part is that the image survived, but his name, place, and real story seem to disappear from the record. George Harmon, at the bottom left, performed his clown act for children with physical disabilities visiting a circus at Madison Square Garden in New York. The photo stands out because his small stage was not a ring, but a quiet moment made for children who rarely saw themselves welcomed like this. In May 1994, a crowd gathered outside an Illinois prison as John Wayne Gacy's final sentence was carried out. The signs show how public anger around the case had lasted for years after one of America's most notorious crime trials. In Zelenograd in 1981, a Soviet engineer worked at an electronica computer terminal inside a major electronics center near Moscow. The machine looks futuristic, but it came from a closed Soviet tech world built to compete with Western computing under heavy secrecy. In Moscow in 1991, people queued for Pepsi beside an armored vehicle during the final months of the Soviet Union. The photo captures one strange moment when Western branding, military presence, and daily shortages shared the same street. At a 1955 movie premiere, a famous actress and a playwright were photographed during a relationship still kept from the public. They married 1 year later, turning this quiet backstage moment into a rare photo before one of Hollywood's most watched marriages. German Wehrmacht troops drove through Oslo in 1940 during Operation Weserübung, the sudden German move into Norway. The bystanders make the photo tense because daily city life continued while a new occupation was arriving street by street. On February 14, 1929, 7 men from a rival Chicago gang were lined up in a garage after they believed a police raid had begun. The case became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and it helped turn Al Capone's Chicago empire into a national scandal. In London in 1972, schoolgirls protested against caning, which was still used in many British schools. Their handmade sign shows pupils openly challenging a classroom practice that British state schools would not ban until the 1980s. In Galway, Ireland in 1913, a family stood outside a thatched cottage with a roof partly covered in grass. The rare color image shows rural poverty before modern housing reached many parts of the Irish West. In 1938, the future Hollywood star was photographed at age 12 with Anna Lower, the foster carer she loved most. The image is rare because it shows a quiet childhood moment before fame turned her into one of the most recognized faces in the world. In Norilsk in 1975, Ika the polar bear was brought to meet elementary school children in the snow. The photo feels unreal because a real Arctic predator stands calmly inside a Soviet mining city playground. On October 12, 1966, children played outside 10 Rillington Place in London, the house linked to the John Christie case. The ordinary street scene is chilling because one of Britain's most infamous post-war crime addresses still looked like a normal family neighborhood. Near Deaf Matin on June 25, 1918, American soldiers used a French 37mm infantry gun from a second-line trench. The small weapon was placed on the parapet so crews could strike enemy positions without leaving the trench system. On Corfu in 1916, soldiers carried an injured comrade on a narrow stretcher after the Serbian army reached the island in exhaustion. Corfu became a recovery base after the winter retreat through Albania, where thousands of Serbian troops arrived hungry, sick, and far from home. In Lysekil, Sweden, on August 19, 1961, a Volvo car rolled off the dock and struck a moored submarine. It is often described as the only recorded traffic incident where a car managed to collide with a submarine. During the Winter War of 1939, Finnish ski troops used forests, snow, and small strike teams to break up Soviet columns on narrow roads. The Soviet Union moved in to push Finland's border away from Leningrad, but poor planning and frozen terrain turned its size into a weakness. In 1953, a young Massachusetts senator and Jacqueline Bouvier were photographed sailing soon after their engagement became public. The relaxed beach scene came before their marriage became one of the most watched political partnerships in United States history. This German 8.8-centimeter Flak 37 gun was photographed in Italian service, probably in North Africa, in 1942 or 1943. Built for aircraft, the gun became feared because crews also used it with great effect against armored vehicles across the desert. Ruth Bader Ginsburg taught at Columbia Law School after becoming its first woman to hold a tenured professorship. Before she joined the Supreme Court, she trained future lawyers while building the legal arguments that helped change women's rights in America. Vietnam veterans marched in New York City with a sign offering to trade their medals for decent jobs. The photo is powerful because it shows men who had served overseas asking for basic work after coming home. In Los Angeles on March 1, 1972, a meditation instructor led a group experiment while wearing headphones and covered eye cups. The photo captures the early 1970s obsession with altered states, when science, spirituality, and performance often mixed in the same room. Behind the scenes of The Godfather, the lead actor used cue cards placed around the set instead of relying fully on memorized lines. The method looked unusual, but it helped create one of cinema's most controlled and famous performances. At the Moscow Olympics opening ceremony on July 19, 1980, thousands of spectators formed the smiling mascot Misha with colored cards. The cheerful image hid a tense games as many countries stayed away after the Soviet move into Afghanistan. At the Bois de Boulogne in Paris on June 25, 1926, Madame Hust posed with a Renault during a women's automotive elegance contest. These events judged the driver, the clothing, and the car together, turning early motoring into a public display of wealth, style, and modern independence. On June 25, 1948, 4 Borgstrom brothers were honored together in Garland, Utah, after their remains were returned home from World War II. Their family became the only recorded 4-star Gold Star family in that war, and the brothers were later placed side by side in Tremonton. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire, the ferry building tower still stood while nearby blocks were reduced to shells. The photo is striking because the city's main gateway survived in the distance, surrounded by streets that looked almost erased. In Berlin in 1969, a girl hung laundry beside the wall that divided the city into 2 political worlds. The bicycle and white sheets make the photo surreal because daily life continued only steps from one of the Cold War's hardest borders. This family photo is said to show 4 generations of men connected to the American Civil War, the Spanish-American War, the First World War, and the Second World War. It is rare because one image appears to stretch from the 1860s to the 1940s through a single family line. In the 1990s, a famous American comedian was photographed with his father on a quiet beach day. The image stands out because it shows the private family side of a performer mostly remembered for wild television and film comedy. In 1957, George the White Cat was photographed walking along a high ledge on the Sydney Harbor Bridge. The painted words below him make the scene unforgettable. Sydney really was at his feet. A Brazilian volunteer nurse served in Italy with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force between 1943 and 1945. After returning decorated, she later rejoined the Army and rose to captain, making this quiet rooftop photo part of a much larger military career. In 1957, a powerful Teamsters union boss made a rude hand gesture during a heated Senate committee hearing. The photo captured his bitter clash with Washington investigators before he later became one of America's most mysterious missing public figures. Maori chief Tomika Temutu was photographed between 1860 and 1879, with his facial moko showing rank, identity, and family history. The image is powerful because his face was not just a portrait. It carried a visual record of leadership that written records often missed. In Hindman, Kentucky, in 1903, 6 sisters walked 4 miles each way to attend a settlement school. Their family of 13 lived in one room without a window, making this photo a rare record of rural Appalachian hardship. In 1969, the Black Panther Party served free breakfasts to school children in cities across the United States. The simple trays of food became controversial because the program fed thousands of children while also showing how much trust the group had built inside local communities. In 1980, 3 former leaders of the global smallpox program read the news that smallpox had been eradicated worldwide. The photo marks one of medicine's rarest victories, a human illness removed from every country through vaccination and tracking. During the Kurdish uprising in Iran between 1979 and 1980, a Kurdish Peshmerga was photographed carrying a rifle in the street. The image captures a tense moment when Kurdish groups sought autonomy while Iran's new government was still taking shape. In Belgrade on May 8, 1980, the funeral of Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito brought together kings, presidents, princes, prime ministers, and foreign ministers from across the world. The crowd of world leaders made it one of the most extraordinary state funerals of the 20th century. Imperial Japanese soldiers climbed the Great Wall of China in 1937 during the widening war in northern China. The ancient wall became a frontline landmark, turning a symbol of protection into part of a modern military campaign. In northern New Guinea on June 22, 1944, Australian Corporal Arthur Edwin Slim Bennett posed with a Bren gun over his shoulder. His relaxed grin makes the photo memorable because the heavy Bren was a key tool for Australian patrols in the Jungle Campaign. In Chelyabinsk in 1996, people reached toward a bus window for free samples of a new kind of bread. The crowded hands show how hard the post-Soviet years were, when even a small food giveaway could become a major event. In 1896, Walter Arnold became Britain's first recorded speeding driver after moving at about 8 miles per hour through Paddock Wood. A constable chased him on a bicycle because the legal limit for cars was only 2 miles per hour. In London in 1966, the heavyweight champion was on a film set when a bee flew close and made him pull back in surprise. The moment is so memorable because the same man who stayed calm against the strongest boxers in the world was caught reacting to one tiny insect in front of everyone. In 1964, 4 classic screen legends posed inside open prop coffins on the set of The Comedy of Terrors. The photo works so well because the actors were famous for frightening audiences, yet here they look completely relaxed between takes. This photo is often mislabeled as Mardi Gras, but the heavy shawls, muddy road, and baby carriage point to a cold European evacuation scene. The most striking detail is the silence of the line, with women carrying small bags as if they had only minutes to leave. In the 1880s, Annie Jones became one of the most famous bearded women in American sideshow history after Phineas Taylor Barnum began exhibiting her as a baby. As an adult, she was known for her beard and extremely long hair, but she also pushed performers to be called artists instead of freaks. This 1890s photo is said to show a cart pulled by wolves or wolf dogs raised from pups in the United States. The strange team looks like a frontier experiment, mixing sled dog work with animals most people would never try to harness. This photo shows Karuk people, a small indigenous group from Russia's far northeast, inside a traditional northern dwelling. By the Russian census of 2010, only 4 people identified as Karuk, making the image a rare trace of a nearly disappeared culture. In Novokuznetsk in 1980, a Soviet hatch worker was photographed with a soot-covered face after a shift in heavy industry. His eyes show the work behind one of the Soviet Union's major coal and steel centers in Siberia. In Petrograd in 1923, residents celebrated after Soviet authorities eased the alcohol ban that had lasted since the imperial era. The bottles and smiles show how a political decision instantly became a street celebration in early Soviet Russia. In Manchester in 1965, 4 British musicians wore anti-smog masks before a concert as city air pollution was still a serious problem. The strange masks make the photo memorable because even world-famous performers had to deal with the dirty air of industrial Britain. In 1984, a Moscow State University student showed handwritten exam notes copied onto her thighs under her skirt. The photo became memorable because it turned a simple school trick into a hidden archive of formulas and facts. During the Los Angeles unrest in 1992, 2 men stood outside a Marx storefront while trying to protect it from crowds in the area. The wall behind them says, "Black-owned," a message many businesses used in hopes of being spared during the chaos. On August 9, 1945, Nagasaki was hit by the second atomic weapon used in World War II, leaving Urakami Cathedral in ruins. The photo is often dated wrong, but it shows the cathedral district after the blast, where one of Japan's largest Christian communities had stood. In San Francisco in 1918, barbers wore face masks while serving customers during the influenza pandemic. The photo feels modern because it shows public health rules inside an ordinary barbershop more than 100 years before today's mask debates. In 1972, Arnold Schwarzenegger was photographed on crutches after knee surgery only months before the Mr. Olympia contest. He still returned to the stage and won his 3rd Mr. Olympia title, making this hospital photo part of bodybuilding history. American prisoners held in the Philippines made this homemade Monopoly board while at Nielsen Airport during World War II. The map and handwritten place names show how they rebuilt a familiar game from memory in a place where normal life had disappeared. Catherine Wright, sister of Wilbur and Orville Wright, prepared for her first airplane flight in France in February 1909. She was more than a passenger. She helped manage the brothers' public image, business contacts, and early aviation work. On September 11, 2001, people walked through Lower Manhattan covered in concrete dust after the World Trade Center towers fell. The photo became one of the clearest images of that morning because ordinary office workers suddenly looked like survivors of a city buried in gray ash. A Vietnam veteran touches a name on the black granite wall of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, District of Columbia. Maya Lin's simple design was first criticized as too stark, but its more than 58,000 names made it one of America's most personal memorials. On September 21, 1958, Martin Luther King Jr. recovered at Harlem Hospital after doctors removed a letter opener from his chest. The metal tip had rested so close to his aorta that a simple sneeze could have changed the future of the civil rights movement. On September 24, 1894, Maori men performed during the Tangi for King Tauyao, the second Maori king. He had led his people through the land wars of the 1860s, so the funeral was also a public farewell to a leader of resistance and survival. In Japan in 1956, workers collected golf balls from a driving range while players were still practicing nearby. The wire cages over their bodies were simple protection from flying balls, turning a quiet sports job into a strange daily risk. In February 1922, Washington socialite Mary Jane posed with a small pistol strapped near her knee. She claimed it was not hidden under the new knee-length fashion, turning a legal loophole into a bold public photo. In Britain, children once wheeled homemade Guy Fawkes figures through the streets before November 5th, asking neighbors for a penny for the guy. The coins helped buy fireworks, and the figure was later placed on the bonfire during a tradition linked to the gunpowder plot. In 1953, the Prisonaires were photographed at Tennessee State Penitentiary after their song Just Walking in the Rain sold about 250,000 copies on Sun Records. Their success was rare because they recorded popular music while still living under prison rules with cell blocks behind them and guards nearby. In South Australia in 1943, young women welded metal supply boxes for ammunition as factories expanded to support the war effort. Their goggles, gloves, and flying sparks show how women stepped into skilled industrial work that had once been seen as almost entirely male. On August 23, 1939, German leaders waited at the Berghof for news that Stalin had accepted the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the quiet room mattered, because the agreement secretly divided Eastern Europe and cleared the way for Germany's move into Poland days later. At Changsha in January 1942, a Chinese soldier positioned a Czech-made ZB Versatis 26 light machine gun on a low ridge. The weapon became one of China's most important infantry tools because it was reliable, portable, and well-suited to defensive fighting. This image does not match the Kuwait oil fires. It looks like a rainy early 20th century city street, not Kuwait in 1991. For the real Kuwait oil fires, the scene would show desert oil wells, thick black smoke, and cleanup teams working for months after more than 600 wells were set alight. On July 24, 1915, the steamship Eastland rolled onto its side in the Chicago River while packed with workers heading to a company picnic. 844 passengers and crew were lost, making it Chicago's worst maritime disaster, only feet from the city docks. On July 24, 1915, the steamship Eastland rolled onto its side in the Chicago River while packed with workers heading to a company picnic. 844 passengers and crew were lost, making it Chicago's worst maritime disaster, only feet from the city docks. Between 1904 and 1914, Steam shovels carved the Panama Canal through rock and mud to connect two oceans. The scene looks modern, but it was built before radios were common in homes, when United States life expectancy at birth was about 47 years. During the 1991 Gulf War, an Israeli family sat in a sealed room wearing gas masks during Scud missile alerts. The photo is striking because a normal living room became a protected shelter, with even the children prepared for a threat that might never be seen. Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961-15, of modern history's most unexpected moments. Fidel Castro, his brother Raul, and other combatants celebrate victory after defeating CIA-led forces in the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961. This early oil field photo shows a well blowout sending a tall column of burning gas and oil into the air while workers watch from the street. Before modern pressure control equipment, one failed well could turn into a public spectacle, a major loss, and a dangerous engineering problem at the same time. In a mid-20th century hypnosis demonstration, a man stood on a rigid participant stretched between two chairs. The display was meant to show catalepsy, a trance-like stiffness that made the body look almost impossible to bend. In Moscow in May 1930, people marched in gas masks during a Soviet demonstration focused on civil defense. The image looks strange because a public parade turned fear of a future air and gas war into something ordinary citizens were expected to practice. Polish doctor Eugene Lazowski helped create a false typhus outbreak by using harmless injections that made German medical tests show positive results. The fake epidemic kept German authorities away from several villages and helped protect about 8,000 people from deportation. In 1952, an 18-year-old baseball player stood at a train station in Mobile, Alabama, with $1.50 and a small bag of clothes. He was heading to Indiana to join the Indianapolis Clowns, a first step toward becoming one of the greatest hitters baseball had ever seen. During World War I, Queenie trained as a mercy dog, carrying first aid supplies to soldiers who could not reach help after battles. Dogs like her also guided medics to injured men, making a simple Red Cross harness one of the most trusted signs on the field. On March 24, 1963, 106-year-old William Casby posed with 5 generations of his family while holding his great-great-granddaughter. Born into slavery in 1857, he lived long enough to be photographed during the Civil Rights era, linking two very different Americas in one frame. In February 1968, United States Marines fought through buildings during the Battle of Hue, one of the hardest urban battles of the Vietnam War. The barred window and close quarters show why the city was so difficult to retake during the Tet Offensive. Between 1938 and 1940, Roma families in Germany were recorded by officials before forced removal from their homes. The calm, rural setting makes the photo disturbing because paperwork and uniforms turned an ordinary family visit into part of a larger persecution system. On March 16, 1985, Indonesia's President Suharto and Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad posed with their wives during a formal visit. The photo captures two powerful Southeast Asian leaders at a time when both countries were shaping the region through long, centralized rule. 17-year-old Henry James of the 121st Pennsylvania Infantry posed in uniform before Gettysburg in 1863. He did not survive the first day of the battle, and his body was never identified, likely resting among the unknown soldiers. In February 1954, a famous Hollywood actress visited United States troops in Korea and posed from a military jeep in rare Kodachrome color. The photo stands out because it shows a global film star stepping into a cold post-war military camp to lift morale far from home. On December 4, 1956, a routine Sun Records session turned into the famous $1 Million Quartet Jam. The tape kept rolling as 4 future music legends played gospel, country, and early rock songs that were not officially released for decades. On the Eastern Front in winter 1942, German infantrymen waved at a low-flying Stuka crossing the frozen sky. The photo captures the strange mix of routine and danger, with soldiers in snow gear watching one of the war's most recognizable aircraft pass above them. In New York in March 1964, Ferrari race cars were loaded outside Luigi Chinetti Motors before the 12 Hours of Sebring. The scene shows how elite European racing machines still had to be pushed by hand through an ordinary city garage before reaching the track. On February 26, 1870, Alfred Ely Beach opened a short pneumatic subway test line hidden under Broadway in New York. A giant fan pushed the small carriage through a tunnel, making this strange station the city's first real glimpse of underground transit. During filming of The Godfather in 1971, the director talked through a hospital scene while the actors stayed in character around the bed. Behind the camera, the calm discussion helped shape a film that later became one of the most studied crime dramas in cinema history. In Budapest in 1956, a Hungarian revolutionary stood near an armored vehicle during the uprising against Soviet control. The damaged street behind him shows how quickly the revolt turned the capital into a symbol of resistance, watched by the whole world. In Chicago in 1969, Black Panthers met with the Young Patriots Organization, a leftist group formed by white Appalachian migrants. The Confederate flag behind them makes the photo startling because these groups still joined the original Rainbow Coalition around poverty, housing, and police abuse. In 1949, actor Robert Mitchum was photographed in a jail cell after a drug possession case briefly interrupted his rising Hollywood career. He later joked that the prison farm felt like Palm Springs without the riffraff, turning a scandal into part of his rebellious screen image. In 1982, federal agents displayed suitcases of evidence from the John DeLorean Sting case, just as his car company was collapsing. DeLorean was later cleared after his lawyers argued he had been pushed into the deal by investigators, turning the case into one of the strangest scandals in auto history. In 1959, United States Navy test subject Marion Myers wore the new Mark IV cold protection suit developed by B.F. Goodrich. The ice blocks around him simulated high-altitude flight conditions, where pilots could face extreme cold long before modern pressure suits became standard. At Yokosuka Airfield in 1945, Japanese pilots Yuzaburo Toguchi and Matsuo Hagiri sat near N-1K Shidenkai and a 6M aircraft. The photo captures the final year of Japan's air war, when newer fighters stood beside older Zero aircraft as resources and time were running out. In the 1960s, a United States Navy sailor posed aboard a patrol boat river in Vietnam with a World War II-era Thompson. The photo shows how older equipment still served on fast river patrols, where crews worked in tight spaces along difficult waterways. In Paris in 1915, motorized ambulances lined up as armies began replacing horse-drawn medical transport with faster vehicles. The photo shows a turning point in battlefield care when engines could move injured soldiers from the front far quicker than older methods. At 4 in the morning on October 30, 1974, Muhammad Ali slipped away from George Foreman during the rumble in the jungle in Zaire. The photo freezes the strategy that stunned boxing. Ali let the stronger champion tire himself out, then took control late in the fight. In spring 1917, Russian aviator Yuri Gilshir practiced aiming from a homemade flight simulator he designed himself. The simple wooden frame let him rehearse aerial shooting on the ground, when military aviation was still new and pilots had to invent their own training tools. In 1985, a British royal was photographed during a supervised firearms training session while wearing hearing protection. The image feels unexpected because it shows a public figure known for ceremony and charity inside a controlled security training environment. In a Paris museum around the early 20th century, a worker held the huge skull cast of a Carnegie diplodocus. The photo is striking because a dinosaur head that once needed a full skeleton display could still be lifted by one man in a workshop. In Tulsa in 1921, The Greenwood district was left in ruins after one of the most destructive racial attacks in United States history. The empty streets and burned buildings show why Greenwood, once called Black Wall Street, became a symbol of lost black wealth and survival. This automatic strike camera frame shows B-17 G. Wee Willie over Stendal, Germany, after an 88mm flak burst hit the aircraft. The photo is rare because it captured the bomber coming apart in the air during the final seconds of its mission. Around 1937, Bill Brandt photographed a Durham miner at home after a 10-hour shift, still covered in coal dust. The quiet room says everything. The mine did not end at the pit because its dust, exhaustion, and danger followed workers back into their homes. On April 13, 1932, Ivy Russell lifted 369 pounds while weighing only 126 pounds. 2,000 people watched the contest, making this photo a rare record of one of Britain's early female strength athletes. In 1853, workers unpacked the huge plaster head of Bavaria while rebuilding the Crystal Palace at Sydenham Hill in South London. The single head shows the scale of Victorian exhibition culture, where national symbols were rebuilt indoors, like giant stage props for public wonder. Near Elbląg, Poland, on January 21, 1983, a man carried a dog through floodwater after the area was hit by winter flooding. The photo is powerful because it shows one small rescue moment inside a disaster where even animals depended on people to get them out alive. In 1945, White House reporters rushed to the phones after President Truman announced Japan's surrender. The photo captures the exact moment news had to move fast as journalists raced to tell the country that World War II was finally ending. In Shoria in 1913, an elderly shore woman carried heavy firewood on her back through a rural Siberian village. The image shows how survival often depended on daily physical labor, long before roads, heating systems, and outside support reached many mountain communities. In France in 1916, a French soldier looked out from a shattered wall, still covered with a bright Michelin advertisement. The contrast is unforgettable because a cheerful commercial sign survived on a ruined building while the front line moved through ordinary towns. On January 14, 1943, Soviet pilot Alexander Kuksin landed near a damaged Polikarpov Forge 153 to rescue Sergeant Pavel Evseev. Evseev held onto the wing during takeoff, and Kuksin flew him more than 100 kilometers back to their airfield. In December 1981, photographer Daffyd Jones captured the Feathers charity ball at Hammersmith Palais in London. The photo shows the raw side of elite youth nightlife, where formal events often ended as messy, private moments in public rooms. On May 22, 1915, Lassen Peak in California sent a huge ash column thousands of meters into the sky. The eruption melted snow, sent mud flows through nearby valleys, and helped turn the area into Lassen Volcanic National Park. In Boston in 1974, firefighter Paul Stanley was lifted by rope from the Charles River while holding a woman during a rescue. Roland Oxton's photo is powerful because it freezes the exact second one rescuer's grip became the difference between panic and survival. In Berlin in 1945, a Soviet soldier watched as a German policeman questioned a woman at a black market spot. The bottle in the policeman's hand shows how fast daily order had to be rebuilt in a city where food, alcohol, and authority had all become uncertain. On January 28, 1944, Keiho Nippo showed Governor General Koiso speaking to Korean conscripts under Japanese colonial rule. His message told them to think of him as a father, a clear example of wartime propaganda turning colonial military service into a loyalty ritual. On the night of March 9, 1945, United States bombers dropped incendiaries over Tokyo in one of the largest air raids of World War II. The ruins show how wooden neighborhoods could vanish almost completely, leaving only factory shells, chimneys, and roads across the burned city. In 1978, Jacques Mezrine posed with a Colt Trooper Mark III during the peak of his fame in France. The photo became part of his legend because he mixed crime, media attention, and public image like a dangerous celebrity. In 1964, a photographer stood on a buried car while documenting the Great Alaska Earthquake's damage. The quake measured magnitude 9.2 and reshaped roads, railways, towns, and coastlines across southern Alaska. On June 19, 1979, a camera caught the exact moment a blast tore through the Marine Hotel in Ballycastle, Northern Ireland. The curtains, glass, and running men make the image rare because it freezes a single second of the troubles before the street could even react. In Turok Szent Miklós, Hungary in 1922, master butcher Sándor Turok posed with his sons and a record 420-kilogram Mangalica pig. The huge woolly animal shows why this hardy Hungarian breed became famous for its size, thick coat, and rich marbled pork. In 1936, American wrestler Everett Marshall practiced holds with a wooden training dummy built to resist like a human opponent. The strange device shows how serious early professional wrestlers were about grip, balance, and muscle memory long before modern gym equipment. In Oberdorf, Switzerland, in 1947, photographer Leonard von Matt captured a woman wearing traditional dress and a silver hairpin. That hairpin signaled she was unmarried, while her steady stare and pipe make the portrait feel far more modern than its village setting. On March 29, 1967, the remains of the tanker Torrey Canyon burned off Cornwall after a massive oil spill. The disaster released about 120,000 tons of crude oil and became one of Britain's first major modern environmental crises. In the Soviet Union in March 1942, a German Junkers Ju-52 burned on a snowy airfield during the Demyansk supply operation. The aircraft mattered because these slow transport planes were the lifeline for German troops cut off in the Demyansk pocket. In 1896, enslaved Mozambicans were photographed in chains under guard before being sent toward Zanzibar. The image is a rare record of the East African slave trade, where people were still being moved by force even as the world claimed the trade was ending. In 1904, a Japanese 11-inch siege gun fired toward Port Arthur during the Russo-Japanese War. The stacked shells show the scale of the siege, where heavy artillery slowly turned a fortified port into a test of endurance and supply. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?